The evening air hung thick with humidity as Sarah Mitchell walked through the dimly lit parking garage beneath the downtown shopping center. Her sneakers made soft, squeaking sounds against the polished concrete floor as she carried 2 grocery bags, one in each arm. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows that danced across the rows of parked vehicles. It was nearly 8 in the evening, later than she usually stayed out, but she had needed to pick up supplies for the community center where she volunteered 3 times a week. Sarah was 32 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and warm hazel eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. She stood at 5 feet 6 inches, with an athletic build that came from years of disciplined training, though most people who met her would simply describe her as fit and approachable. She wore casual clothing, jeans, and a light blue sweater, nothing that would draw attention or suggest anything unusual about her background. That was exactly how she preferred it these days. The parking garage was mostly empty at this hour. Most shoppers had left before the stores began closing, leaving behind a scattered collection of vehicles belonging to late-shift workers and a few stragglers like herself. Sarah's car, a modest gray sedan, was parked in the far corner where she had found a spot earlier that afternoon. She had spent the last 6 months living a quiet life in this medium-sized coastal town, a deliberate choice after 12 years of service that had taken her to some of the most dangerous places on Earth. As she approached her vehicle, Sarah noticed 3 men standing near a white van 2 rows over. Something about their posture made her alert system activate, that internal alarm that had kept her alive through countless operations in hostile territory. They were trying to look casual, but their body language told a different story. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head and a leather jacket, kept glancing in her direction. The other 2, one heavy-set with a thick beard and another thinner man with nervous energy, were positioned in a way that seemed strategic rather than coincidental. Sarah continued walking at the same steady pace, not showing any sign that she had noticed them. Her mind was already processing potential scenarios and calculating distances, exits, and options. Years of training had taught her to stay calm in situations where others might panic, to observe without appearing to observe, and to never underestimate a threat until she had gathered enough information to assess it properly. The heavy-set man started walking toward her first. His approach was direct, not bothering with subtlety now that she was close enough. Sarah set her grocery bags down gently beside her car, her movements fluid and controlled. She reached into her pocket as if searching for her keys, but her fingers were actually assessing what she had available. A small canister of pepper spray, her phone, and her car key with its panic button. The man smiled as he got closer, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile predators wear when they think they have found easy prey. His 2 companions had spread out, moving to flank her position. Classic intimidation tactics, the kind used by people who had done this before and felt confident in their ability to control the situation through numbers and fear. "Evening, miss," the heavy-set man said, his voice rough and carrying a tone of false politeness. "Nice night for shopping, isn't it?" Sarah straightened up, meeting his gaze directly. "It is," she replied simply, her voice calm and steady. She had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged people like this. "Have a good evening." She turned toward her car door, but the thin, nervous man had already moved to block her path. He was younger than the others, probably in his mid-20s, with darting eyes and fingers that kept twitching. Sarah recognized the signs of someone on drugs, which made him potentially more unpredictable and dangerous than his companions. "Not so fast," the nervous man said, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracking slightly. "We just want to talk to you for a minute." The man in the leather jacket, who had been watching from a distance, now moved in closer. He was clearly the leader of this group. There was a calculated coldness in his eyes, the look of someone who had hurt people before and felt no remorse about it. He pulled something from his pocket, a length of rope, and Sarah's assessment of the situation shifted immediately from potential robbery to something far more serious. "Here's how this is going to work," the leader said, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to walk quietly to our van over there. Take whatever you want." The heavy-set man laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Oh, we're going to take what we want," he said. But it's not your purse we're interested in. The leader stepped forward quickly, grabbing Sarah's right wrist with his left hand while trying to loop the rope around it with his right. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for, the moment when they committed to physical contact and left themselves vulnerable. In their minds, they had already won. They saw a woman alone, outnumbered, and apparently compliant. What they did not see was someone who had spent over a decade training in hand-to-hand combat, someone who had earned her place among the most elite special operations forces in the world. Sarah's response was instantaneous and explosive. She pivoted on her left foot, using the leader's grip on her wrist as an anchor point. Her right elbow shot up and back, catching him squarely in the throat. It was a precise strike, delivered with enough force to disrupt his breathing without causing permanent damage. The leader staggered backward, dropping the rope and clutching at his neck, his eyes wide with shock. The heavy-set man lunged at her from the side, but Sarah was already in motion. She dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him with a devastating leg kick that had all her body weight and momentum behind it. He went down hard, his head bouncing off the concrete with a sound that made the nervous man hesitate. That hesitation cost him. Sarah closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, her movements fluid and economical. She grabbed his reaching arm, twisted it at an angle that sent pain shooting through his shoulder, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the side of her car. He slumped down, semi-conscious and bleeding from his nose. The leader had recovered enough to come at her again, and this time he had pulled a knife from his jacket. It was a cheap folding knife, the kind someone carries to look dangerous rather than for serious use, but it was still a weapon and still a threat. He held it low, ready to thrust upward, a technique that suggested he had some training in street fighting. Sarah's eyes tracked the knife, her body automatically shifting into a defensive stance. Years of training against knife attacks kicked in. She did not try to grab the blade or make any of the mistakes untrained people make when facing an edged weapon. Instead, she waited for him to commit to an attack, her breathing steady and controlled despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The leader lunged, the knife coming up in a vicious arc aimed at her midsection. Sarah sidestepped, using her forearm to redirect his attacking arm while simultaneously striking his elbow joint with her other hand. The combination of moves was something she had practiced thousands of times until it became muscle memory. The knife clattered to the ground, and before the leader could react, Sarah had locked his arm and swept his legs, sending him crashing down onto the concrete. She dropped down with him, her knee pressing into his back, one hand controlling his arm in a position that would cause excruciating pain if he tried to move. The entire encounter had lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 men who had expected to kidnap a lone woman now found themselves incapacitated, groaning in pain on the parking garage floor. Sarah reached for her phone with her free hand, keeping her weight and position on the leader to ensure he stayed down. She dialed emergency services, and when the operator answered, her voice was calm and professional. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm in the parking garage at Riverside Shopping Center, lower level, northwest corner. I need police and possibly ambulances. 3 men attempted to abduct me, and I defended myself. They are currently neutralized but may require medical attention." The operator began asking questions, standard protocol for this type of call, but Sarah heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see a security guard running toward her location, his hand on his radio, and his face showing complete confusion at the scene before him. "Ma'am, what happened here?" the guard asked, stopping a safe distance away. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, and clearly not trained for this kind of situation. His name tag read Jim, and his eyes kept darting between Sarah and the 3 men on the ground. "These 3 attempted to kidnap me," Sarah explained, her tone matter of fact. "I'm on the phone with emergency services right now. The police are on their way." Jim stared at her, then at the men, then back at her. The heavy-set man was sitting up now, holding his head and looking dazed. The nervous one was still leaning against her car, blood dripping from his nose. The leader was still face down with Sarah's knee in his back, though she had eased up on the pressure of the arm lock. "You did this?" Jim asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "All 3 of them. They didn't give me much choice," Sarah replied. She could hear sirens in the distance now, growing closer. I need you to do something for me, Jim. Can you retrieve that knife over there and make sure no one touches it? The police will want it as evidence. Jim nodded, seeming grateful to have a specific task. He walked over to where the knife lay on the ground, pulling out a handkerchief to pick it up without touching it directly. I've been working security for 20 years, he said, shaking his head. Never seen anything like this. The police arrived within minutes, 3 patrol cars with lights flashing, pulling into the parking garage with urgency. Officers emerged with hands on their weapons, not sure what situation they were walking into. Sarah slowly raised her hands, keeping her movements visible and non-threatening. I'm the one who called, she announced clearly. My name is Sarah Mitchell. These 3 men attempted to abduct me. I defended myself. I am unarmed. A female officer approached first, her partner covering her with his weapon still drawn, but pointed at the ground. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from that individual and keep your hands where I can see them. Sarah complied immediately, releasing the leader and stepping back with her hands raised. She knew how these situations worked from the other side. The officers needed to secure the scene and make sure everyone was safe before they could sort out what had actually happened. The leader tried to get up, but another officer was already there, instructing him to stay down. Within minutes, all 3 attackers were in handcuffs, being checked for weapons and injuries. The police found additional rope in the van, along with duct tape, a taser, and other items that made their intentions clear. The female officer, whose name tag identified her as Officer Martinez, led Sarah to the side where they could talk. Are you injured? She asked, her tone professional but concerned. No, Sarah replied. They never got the chance. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Sarah recounted the events in clear, concise detail, the way she had been trained to deliver after-action reports. She described the men's positions, their statements, their weapons, and her response. Officer Martinez took notes, occasionally glancing at Sarah with an expression that suggested she was reevaluating her initial assumptions. Ms. Mitchell, Officer Martinez said carefully, what you did tonight was pretty remarkable. Most people wouldn't have been able to defend themselves against 3 attackers. Do you have training in self-defense? Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. She had been living a private life for the past 6 months, and her military service was not something she advertised. But the police would run her background check anyway, and the truth would come out eventually. I have military training, she said simply. I served for 12 years in special operations. Officer Martinez's eyebrows rose. Special operations? Which branch? Navy, Sarah replied. I prefer not to go into more detail than that right now. The officer nodded slowly, understanding that some things remained classified even after service ended. She looked back at the 3 men being loaded into patrol cars, all of them looking significantly worse for wear than the woman they had tried to abduct. They picked the wrong person to mess with tonight, Officer Martinez observed. Do you know who they are? Have you ever seen them before? No, Sarah said. I've never seen any of them before tonight. I think I was just a random target. Wrong place, wrong time from their perspective. But, even as she said it, something nagged at the back of Sarah's mind. The leader had seemed too prepared, too organized. Random opportunists did not usually operate with that level of coordination. They typically looked for the easiest targets in the most convenient locations. This felt different somehow, more deliberate. More officers had arrived, including detectives who would handle the investigation. Sarah found herself being asked to go to the police station to give a formal statement. She agreed readily, knowing that cooperation was important and that she had nothing to hide. The detectives assured her this was standard procedure and that she was not in any trouble. At the station, Sarah was led to an interview room where she met Detective Robert Chun, a man in his mid-40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He offered her coffee, which she accepted, and then sat down across from her with a notepad and recorder. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming in, Detective Chun began. I know it's been a difficult evening, but I need to get your statement on record. Are you comfortable proceeding? Of course, Sarah said. I want to help in any way I can. Detective Chun turned on the recorder and went through the formalities of identifying everyone present and the time and date. Then, he asked Sarah to recount the events once more, this time with even more detail. She did so, maintaining the same calm, factual tone she had used with Officer Martinez. When she finished, Detective Chun leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. Ms. Mitchell, I've been a detective for 18 years. In that time, I've seen countless assault cases, attempted abductions, and violent crimes. What you did tonight is extraordinary. 3 armed men. And you walked away without a scratch while they all needed medical attention. I was trained for situations like this, Sarah said simply. My training took over. Navy Special Operations, Chin said, reading from notes he had been given. We ran a background check, standard procedure. Your file is heavily redacted, but what we can see is impressive. Multiple commendations, deployments to classified locations, specialized training in hand-to-hand combat, and tactical operations. Sarah waited, knowing there was a question coming. What I'm curious about, Chin continued, is why someone with your background and skills is living quietly in our town, working part-time at a bookstore and volunteering at a community center. That seems like quite a change of pace. I left the service 6 months ago, Sarah explained. I gave 12 years to my country, and it was time for something different. I wanted a normal life, or as close to normal as I could get. This town seemed like a good place to start over. Chin nodded, accepting her explanation. Well, your training certainly came in handy tonight. Those 3 men you took down, we're learning more about them. The leader, Mark Davidson, has a record. Assault, attempted kidnapping in another state, and he was out on parole. The other 2, brothers named Danny and Rick Morrison, also have records for violent crimes. Sarah absorbed this information, her concern growing. So this wasn't their first time. Sarah considered her response carefully as Officer Martinez drove through the quiet town streets. The question about her SEAL training was something she had fielded before, though not often, and each time she had to decide how much of her story to share. The truth was complicated, filled with pain and triumph in equal measure, and not something she discussed lightly with strangers. But Martinez had been professional and respectful throughout the evening, and there was genuine curiosity rather than sensationalism in her question. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, Sarah finally answered, her voice quiet but steady. And I've done a lot of hard things. The training is designed to break you, physically and mentally. It's designed to find your limits, and then push you past them until you discover you're capable of things you never thought possible. Martinez nodded, her eyes on the road, but clearly listening intently. I read about the program opening up to women a few years back. There was a lot of controversy about it. A lot of people saying women couldn't handle it, that it would lower standards. The standards didn't lower, Sarah said, a hint of steel entering her voice. Every person who graduates from that program, man or woman, has met exactly the same requirements. We carried the same weight, swam the same distances, endured the same sleep deprivation. Nobody got special treatment, and nobody wanted it. We just wanted the chance to prove we could do it. And you did, Martinez observed. More than proved it, from what I saw tonight. Sarah smiled slightly. Tonight was different. Tonight was 3 criminals in a parking garage, not a combat situation in hostile territory. But, yes, the training helped. It always helps. They pulled up in front of Sarah's apartment building, a modest 3-story structure in a quiet neighborhood. Martinez put the car in park, but did not immediately unlock the doors. Instead, she turned to face Sarah directly. I became a police officer because I wanted to protect people, Martinez said. I wanted to make a difference, to stand between civilians and the people who would hurt them. But I've been on the force for 8 years now, and I've seen things that make me feel helpless. Women who are attacked, brutalized, and sometimes killed by predators like the ones you took down tonight. And I think about how different things might have been if those women had your training, your confidence, your ability to fight back. Sarah understood where this was going. She had heard similar sentiments before, from other officers, from other women, from people who saw her skills and wished they could be distributed more widely to those who needed them most. I teach a women's self-defense class at the community center, Sarah said, every Tuesday and Thursday evening. It's basic stuff compared to military training, but it's practical and effective. The goal is to give women tools they can use to protect themselves, to build their confidence, to help them understand they're not helpless even in dangerous situations. Martinez's face lit up with interest. Really? I had no idea. That's exactly the kind of thing we need more of in this community. Do you have room for more students? Always, Sarah replied. The class is free, and anyone can join. We focus on situational awareness, escape techniques, and basic strikes that can create enough space to get away from an attacker. I tell my students that the goal is never to win a fight. The goal is to survive and escape. They exchanged contact information, and Martinez promised to spread the word about the class at the police station. She also mentioned that the department often looked for qualified instructors to provide training for officers, particularly in hand-to-hand combat techniques. Sarah filed that information away for future consideration, though she was not ready to commit to anything that formal just yet. Inside her apartment, Sarah finally allowed herself to decompress. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the encounter and the subsequent hours at the police station was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that was both physical and emotional. She made herself tea, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on her couch with her phone, knowing there were calls she needed to make. The first was to her sister, Emily, who lived 3 states away with her husband and 2 children. Emily was the only family Sarah had left after their parents had passed away in a car accident 5 years earlier. They talked regularly, though Sarah had not shared much about her transition to civilian life beyond the basics. Sarah? It's midnight. Is everything okay? Emily's voice was thick with sleep and immediately concerned. I'm fine, Sarah assured her. Something happened tonight, and I wanted you to hear it from me before you see it on the news or read about it online. She gave Emily a condensed version of events, leaving out the more violent details, but making it clear that she had been in danger and had defended herself successfully. Emily's reaction was a mixture of shock, fear, and pride, cycling through emotions as she processed what her sister was telling her. Oh my God, Sarah. Those men could have killed you, Emily said, her voice breaking slightly. I know you can take care of yourself. I know what you're capable of, but the thought of you being in danger like that. I know, Sarah said gently. But I'm okay. I promise. The training kicked in, and everything worked out. The police have those men in custody, and they're going to be put away for a long time. They talked for another 20 minutes, with Emily extracting promises that Sarah would be more careful, would not go out alone late at night, and would consider moving to a safer area or even coming to live closer to Emily's family. Sarah agreed to think about it, though she knew she would not leave. She had chosen this town deliberately, and one incident, however frightening, was not going to drive her away from the life she was trying to build. The second call was harder. Sarah scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for, Marcus Webb, her former commanding officer, and someone who had been both a mentor and a friend during her years in service. Marcus had retired from active duty 2 years earlier, but remained connected to the military community as a consultant and advocate for veterans transitioning to civilian life. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. This better be important. Do you know what time it is? It's Sarah. Sorry for the late call, but I needed to talk to you. Marcus's tone changed immediately, the irritation replaced by concern. Sarah? What's wrong? Are you hurt? She told him what had happened, giving him more detail than she had given Emily because she knew he would understand the tactical aspects and would want to know exactly how the situation had unfolded. Marcus listened without interrupting, a skill he had mastered during decades of military service. And when she finished, there was a long pause. 3 hostiles, armed, coordinated attack pattern. Marcus finally said, his voice analytical. You neutralized all 3 without sustaining injuries. That's textbook execution, Mitchell. Your training held up exactly as it should have. I know, Sarah said. But, Marcus, there's something else. The way they operated, it felt organized. Too organized for random opportunists. And when the police ran their backgrounds, the leader had a record in another state. He relocated here recently. You think this might not have been random, Marcus said, understanding immediately where she was going with this. You think someone might have targeted you specifically? I don't know, Sarah admitted. It could just be paranoia. It's been 6 months since I left, and I've been careful to keep a low profile. But the whole thing felt off somehow. Marcus was quiet for a moment, And Sarah could almost hear him thinking, processing information, and running through possibilities. "Listen to me carefully," he said finally. "You're probably right that it was just bad luck, wrong place, and wrong time. But given your background, given some of the operations you were involved in, it pays to be cautious. I want you to do something for me." "What?" "I want you to vary your routines. Don't go to the same places at the same times. Keep your eyes open for anyone following you or showing unusual interest in your movements. And I want you to check in with me every few days. Just a quick text to let me know you're okay. Can you do that?" Sarah agreed, feeling both reassured and slightly unsettled by Marcus's concern. He was not someone given to unnecessary worry, and if he thought precautions were warranted, then they probably were. They talked a bit longer about Sarah's life in the town, her work at the bookstore, and her self-defense classes. Marcus approved of the classes, noting that sharing skills and experience was a good way for veterans to find purpose in civilian life. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment and thought about the path that had brought her here. 12 years ago, she had been a 20-year-old college student with dreams of becoming a teacher. She had been studying education, planning a conventional life, when the events of a summer night changed everything. Her best friend from high school, Jessica, had been attacked while jogging. Jessica survived, but the trauma had altered her fundamentally, turning a vibrant, confident young woman into someone fearful and withdrawn. Sarah had felt helpless watching her friend struggle with the aftermath of violence. She had wanted to do something, to take action, to prevent what had happened to Jessica from happening to others. That desire had led her to a military recruiter's office, where she had learned about opportunities for women in combat roles that had not existed in previous generations. The idea of becoming a Navy SEAL had seemed impossible at first, a goal so ambitious that even contemplating it felt presumptuous. But the more she learned, the more she became convinced it was what she needed to do. The training had been everything the recruiters had promised, and worse. Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training, known simply as BUD/S, was a 6-month program designed to weed out all but the most determined and capable candidates. The attrition rate hovered around 75%, meaning 3 out of 4 people who started the program did not finish it. For women, the challenges were even greater, not because the standards were different, but because they were entering a field that had been exclusively male for decades and faced skepticism at every turn. Sarah remembered the first day of training, standing in formation with dozens of other candidates, feeling the weight of expectations and doubts pressing down on her shoulders. The instructors had made it clear from the beginning that they did not care about gender, race, or background. They cared only about performance, about whether you could meet the standards and complete the missions. Some of the male candidates had been supportive, recognizing that anyone tough enough to volunteer for SEAL training deserved respect. Others had been openly hostile, convinced that women would lower standards or become liabilities in combat situations. She had proven them wrong through sheer determination and performance. Every run, every swim, every obstacle course, she had pushed herself to excel. She had learned to embrace the cold during surf torture, when candidates sat in the ocean for hours while instructors sprayed them with cold water. She had endured Hell Week, the infamous 5N, a half-day period of continuous training with less than 4 hours of sleep total, where candidates are pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits. Of the 18 women who had started BUD/S in her class, only 3 had made it to Hell Week, and only Sarah had graduated. After BUD/S came months of additional training in parachuting, combat diving, land warfare, and specialized skills. She learned to shoot dozens of different weapons with expert precision, to navigate by stars and compass, to provide emergency medical care in combat situations, and to operate in environments ranging from Arctic conditions to desert heat. She learned languages, cultural awareness, and how to blend into populations where her presence might mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her first deployment had been to the Middle East as part of a task force conducting raids against terrorist networks. She had been nervous before that first mission, wondering if all the training would translate into effectiveness in real combat. It had. Her team had successfully extracted a high-value target from a fortified compound, and Sarah had performed her role flawlessly. The mission had earned her the respect of her teammates, the only validation that really mattered in that world. Over the next 12 years, Sarah had deployed multiple times to various global hotspots. She had participated in direct action raids, special reconnaissance missions, and operations so classified that she could not discuss them even with other cleared personnel. She had seen combat, had been shot at and had shot back, had lost friends to enemy fire and training accidents. She had also experienced the incredible bonds that formed between people who trusted each other with their lives on a regular basis. But after 12 years, something had shifted inside her. The adrenaline that had once fueled her through dangerous situations began to feel less like excitement and more like exhaustion. She started noticing the toll that constant deployments and high-stress operations were taking on her mental and emotional health. She saw the same signs in her teammates: the 1,000-yard stares, the difficulty readjusting to normal life between deployments, the relationships that crumbled under the strain of a lifestyle that demanded everything and offered little in return beyond the mission itself. The decision to leave had not been easy. Sarah had built her entire adult identity around being a Navy SEAL. It was not just what she did, it was who she was. Walking away from that felt like abandoning a core part of herself. But she had also recognized that there was more to life than the next mission, the next deployment, the next operation. She wanted to discover who Sarah Mitchell could be when she was not wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. She wanted to build connections with people without wondering when the next deployment would tear those connections apart. She wanted, simply, to find out if she could be happy living a normal life. So she had left the service with honors, with commendations, and with the gratitude of her command. She had chosen this coastal town almost at random, drawn by its combination of peaceful atmosphere and active community. She had found an apartment, gotten a job at a local bookstore that paid enough to cover her modest expenses, and started volunteering at a community center where she could give back through teaching self-defense. For 6 months, it had worked. She had started to build a routine, to make friends, to feel like she was becoming part of a community. The nightmares that had plagued her immediately after leaving service were becoming less frequent. She was sleeping better, eating better, and generally feeling more balanced than she had in years. She had even started thinking about what might come next, whether she might go back to school, pursue the teaching degree she had set aside all those years ago, or find some other way to make a meaningful contribution to society. And then, tonight had happened. 3 men with rope and duct tape and bad intentions had tried to make her a victim. They had failed spectacularly, but the incident had stirred up feelings and reactions Sarah thought she had left behind. The cold calculation that had taken over during the fight, the automatic threat assessment and tactical response, the complete lack of hesitation in neutralizing the threats. Sarah finally went to bed around 3 in the morning, her mind still buzzing with ideas despite her physical exhaustion. She fell asleep quickly, but her dreams were turbulent and fragmented. She found herself back in the parking garage, but this time there were dozens of attackers instead of 3. She fought them off one by one, but more kept coming, an endless stream of threats that she could not fully defeat. She woke several times during the night, her heart racing, before finally giving up on sleep around 7 and getting up to make coffee. The morning news was already covering the incident. Sarah watched from her kitchen as a reporter stood in front of the shopping center, describing what the reporter called a harrowing attempted abduction that had been thwarted by the intended victim's quick thinking and self-defense skills. The report did not name Sarah, respecting her privacy as the victim of an attempted crime, but it did provide details about the 3 suspects and their criminal histories. Mark Davidson, the leader, had been convicted of assault and attempted kidnapping in Nevada 3 years earlier. He had served 18 months before being released on parole with the requirement that he relocate to a new area and report regularly to a parole officer. The Morrison brothers, Danny and Rick, had records including assault, theft, and drug-related offenses. Together, they represented exactly the kind of predators that communities feared but often struggled to protect against. The reporter interviewed Detective Chun, who spoke carefully about the ongoing investigation while praising the victim's ability to defend herself. This young woman showed remarkable courage and skill in an extremely dangerous situation, Chin said to the camera. She defended herself legally and appropriately, using only the force necessary to neutralize the threat. Her actions may well have prevented these individuals from harming others in our community. Sarah's phone started ringing around 8 in the morning. The first call was from Diana, the director of the community center where Sarah volunteered and taught her self-defense classes. Diana was a woman in her late 50s who had dedicated her life to community service and had taken an immediate liking to Sarah when she had first approached the center about teaching classes. "Sarah, I just saw the news. Are you all right? Please tell me you're all right." Diana's voice was urgent and concerned. "I'm fine, Diana. Really, I'm a little tired and sore, but nothing serious. Thank God. When I saw the report, I just knew it had to be you. They described it as happening last night around 8, and I knew you shop at that center. The way they described how the victim fought back, I thought, that sounds like something Sarah could do." Diana paused. "Actually, it sounds like something only Sarah could do." They talked for several minutes, with Diana insisting that Sarah take time off from her volunteer work if she needed it. Sarah assured her that she would be at the center the following evening for her regular class, that keeping to her normal routine would be better than sitting at home dwelling on what had happened. "Actually," Sarah said, "I have an idea I wanted to run by you. Last night got me thinking about the self-defense program, about how we could expand it and make it more comprehensive. Do you have time this week to sit down and talk about it?" Diana agreed immediately, suggesting they meet for lunch the next day. Sarah could hear the excitement in Diana's voice. The community center was always looking for new programs and ways to serve the local population, and Diana had mentioned several times that Sarah's self-defense classes were among their most popular offerings. The calls kept coming throughout the morning. Her boss at the bookstore checked in to make sure she was okay and told her to take a few days off if she needed them. Several of her students from the self-defense class reached out after hearing the news or seeing it on social media. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: shock, concern, relief that Sarah was unharmed, and questions about what had happened. By noon, Sarah needed a break from her phone. She changed into running clothes and headed out for a jog, something she did almost every day as part of maintaining her fitness. The physical activity helped clear her mind and process the events of the previous night from a different perspective. As she ran through the tree-lined streets of her neighborhood, she found herself automatically scanning her surroundings, noting potential threats and escape routes in a way she had not done so consciously since leaving the service. Marcus's advice about varying her routine echoed in her mind. She altered her usual running path, choosing streets she did not normally take, staying in areas with more visibility and foot traffic. It felt like slipping back into old habits, the constant vigilance and tactical awareness that had been second nature during her military career. Part of her resented needing to think this way again, but another part acknowledged that it was simply prudent given what had happened. When she returned to her apartment, there was a police car parked outside. Officer Martinez stood leaning against it, and she straightened up when she saw Sarah approaching. "I hope you don't mind," Martinez said. "I wanted to check on you and see how you're doing after last night." "I'm okay," Sarah said, appreciating the gesture. "Would you like to come up?" "I was about to make lunch." They sat in Sarah's small kitchen, eating sandwiches Sarah had thrown together while Martinez updated her on the investigation. The three men were all being held without bail, charged with attempted kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and several other offenses. The district attorney's office was treating the case as a high priority given the suspects' criminal histories and the evidence of planning and premeditation. "There's something else," Martinez said, her expression becoming more serious. "We executed a search warrant on Davidson's residence this morning. We found a lot of disturbing materials. Photos of women around town, notes about their schedules and routines, maps marking different locations. It looks like he had been planning this type of operation for a while, possibly targeting multiple potential victims." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "Were any of those photos of me?" Martinez hesitated. "Yes, there were several photos of you. Outside the bookstore where you work, at the community center, jogging in your neighborhood." He had been watching you for at least 2 weeks based on the dates on some of the images. The revelation shifted Sarah's understanding of what had happened completely. This had not been a random attack. She had been specifically targeted, observed, and selected. The question was why. Had Davidson somehow learned about her background and seen her as a challenge? Had he targeted her precisely because she lived alone and appeared to be a single woman without obvious protection? Or was there something else, some connection she was not seeing? The detective wants to interview you again, Martinez continued. There are questions about whether Davidson might have had information about your military background, whether that might have influenced his decision to target you. It seems unlikely, but they want to be thorough. Sarah agreed to come to the station that afternoon. After Martinez left, she sat alone in her apartment, trying to process this new information. The idea that she had been stalked for 2 weeks without noticing was disturbing and professionally embarrassing. She had been trained to detect surveillance, to recognize when someone was taking an unusual interest in her movements. How had she missed this? But she knew the answer. She had been deliberately trying to live a normal civilian life. She had been trying not to be the hyper-vigilant operator who saw threats in every shadow and analyzed everyone who looked in her direction. She had been trying to relax, to let go of the constant state of alert that had defined her military career. In doing so, she had made herself vulnerable. At the police station, Detective Chen walked Sarah through the evidence they had recovered from Davidson's apartment. The photos were unsettling to see, candid shots that captured her going about her daily life, completely unaware that she was being observed. There were notes in Davidson's handwriting describing her routine, her work schedule, the time she went jogging, the fact that she lived alone. What we're trying to understand, Chen said, is whether he knew about your military service. Did you ever mention it to anyone in town? Did you display anything in your apartment or car that might have indicated your background? Sarah thought carefully. I've told a few people I was in the military. My boss at the bookstore knows, and Diana at the community center. Some of my self-defense students know because they've asked about my training. But I've never been specific about what I did or mentioned being a SEAL. Could someone have recognized you from your service? A news article, a photo, something that might have identified you. It's possible, Sarah admitted. There have been some articles about women in special operations, though they usually don't use names or photos without permission. I was never the subject of any public attention that I'm aware of. Chen pulled out another piece of evidence, a printout from a website that discussed women in special operations. Someone had highlighted a section that mentioned Sarah by name, though the article was careful not to provide specific details about her service or current location. The article was from a military publication that had covered the integration of women into SEAL teams. We found this in Davidson's apartment, Chen said. It suggests he did know about your background. What we can't figure out is whether he targeted you because of it or despite it. Was he looking for a challenge, someone who would fight back? Or did he not fully understand what your training meant? Sarah stared at the printout, feeling a mix of anger and violation. Her service record was supposed to be protected information. While some details might be publicly available, her current location and civilian identity should have been secure. Someone had either done extensive research or had access to information they should not have had. I want to know how he got this information, Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. This article shouldn't have led him to me. There has to be more to it. Chen nodded. We're looking into it. Davidson's not talking much, but we've seized his computer and phone. Our tech team is going through everything. If there's a trail of how he found you, we'll uncover it. The interview continued for another hour, with Chen asking detailed questions about Sarah's daily routine, whether she had noticed anyone following her or showing unusual interest, whether she had received any threatening messages or communications. Sarah answered everything honestly, admitting that she had not noticed the surveillance and had not taken the kind of security precautions she might have if she had still been active duty. When she finally left the station, it was late afternoon. Sarah drove home feeling unsettled and conflicted. Part of her wanted to pack up and leave town, to disappear and start over somewhere new where her past would not follow her. But that felt like running, like letting the predators win. She had not spent 12 years serving her country just to be driven from her home by some criminal who thought he could intimidate or harm her. That evening, Sarah went to the community center for her scheduled self-defense class. Word had spread about the incident, and the class was packed with nearly twice as many attendees as usual. Women of all ages filled the room, from teenagers to women in their 60s. They all wanted to know what had happened, how Sarah had defended herself, and what they could learn to do the same. Sarah addressed the group before beginning the class. I know many of you have heard about what happened to me last night. I'm going to tell you about it, not to scare you, but because I think there are lessons we can all learn from the experience. She described the attack in clinical terms, focusing on the tactical elements rather than the emotional aspects. She explained how she had noticed the men before they approached, how she had assessed the threat, and how she had responded when they made physical contact. Most importantly, she emphasized that her goal had never been to defeat 3 attackers in combat. Her goal had been to create enough damage and chaos that she could escape. The techniques I'm going to teach you tonight are not about winning fights, Sarah said, echoing what she had told Officer Martinez. They're about survival and escape. Your goal if you're ever attacked is to do whatever you need to do to get away safely. That might mean fighting back, or it might mean complying temporarily to create an opportunity to escape. Every situation is different, and you have to trust your judgment in the moment. The class that evening was intense and focused. Sarah taught them how to strike vulnerable targets, how to break grips, how to use their body weight and momentum against larger attackers. She emphasized the importance of being loud, of drawing attention, of doing whatever would increase their chances of survival. She also taught them about situational awareness, about recognizing warning signs before violence occurred, about trusting their instincts when something felt wrong. One student, a woman named Jennifer who was in her mid-30s, stayed after class to talk to Sarah privately. Jennifer had been attending the classes for 3 months, and Sarah had noticed her dedication and rapid improvement. I need to tell you something, Jennifer said, her voice soft but determined. I'm leaving my husband. He's been abusive for years, and I've been too afraid to leave. But after hearing about what you did, about how you stood up and fought back, I realized I can't keep living in fear. I contacted a domestic violence shelter today, and they're helping me plan a safe exit. Sarah felt a wave of emotion that she carefully controlled. Jennifer, that's incredibly brave. Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the hardest things anyone can do. Have you worked with the shelter to create a safety plan? Do you have somewhere safe to go? They talked for 30 minutes about Jennifer's situation, with Sarah providing what guidance she could while being careful not to overstep her expertise. She gave Jennifer the contact information for several resources in the community, including legal aid services and counseling programs. Before Jennifer left, she hugged Sarah tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me that I don't have to be a victim." After everyone had left, Diana approached Sarah as she was cleaning up the training space. "That was powerful," Diana said simply. "I've been running this community center for 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what happened in here tonight. You've touched something deep in these women, Sarah. You've given them hope and tools and the belief that they can protect themselves." "I just taught them some techniques," Sarah said, deflecting the praise. "No," Diana said firmly. "You did much more than that. You showed them what's possible. You demonstrated that even when outnumbered and attacked, strength and training can make the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. That's not just teaching techniques. That's transforming mindsets." They sat down to discuss Sarah's ideas for expanding the program. Sarah shared her research from the previous night, her vision for a comprehensive self-defense and personal safety initiative that would address physical, psychological, and practical aspects of protection. Diana listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes and asking questions. "This is exactly what we need," Diana said when Sarah finished. "I've been saying for years that we should do more in this area, but I didn't have the expertise or the vision. You have both. With your background and your obvious passion for this work, we could create something truly special here." They discussed logistics, funding, and partnerships. Diana knew of several grants available for community safety programs and had connections with local organizations that might be interested in collaborating. She suggested they start by expanding the current class schedule and adding specialized workshops on specific topics like awareness skills, verbal de-escalation, and home safety. As the program grew, they could apply for larger grants to support more comprehensive initiatives. Sarah left the community center feeling energized and purposeful. For the first time since leaving the military, she had a clear sense of mission and direction. This was not just about teaching women to throw punches. It was about systemic change, about shifting the culture from one where women were expected to live in fear to one where they were empowered to protect themselves and each other. Over the next week, Sarah's life took on a new rhythm. She continued working at the bookstore, but she also began dedicating significant time to developing her expanded self-defense program. She met with representatives from the domestic violence shelter, the police department, and several community organizations. Everyone she spoke with expressed enthusiasm for the initiative and offered various forms of support. Officer Martinez became a regular collaborator, offering to teach workshops on legal aspects of self-defense and providing perspective from law enforcement on what worked and what did not in real-world situations. A local therapist who specialized in trauma volunteered to lead sessions on psychological recovery from violence. A lawyer offered pro bono services to help women navigate restraining orders and legal protections. The story of Sarah's encounter in the parking garage had spread through the community, though the news reports had been careful to protect her identity. Still, people connected the dots, and Sarah found herself something of a local celebrity. Women approached her in the grocery store, at the bookstore, on the street, wanting to thank her or ask about her classes. She handled the attention with grace, always redirecting it back to the importance of preparation and training rather than focusing on herself. Detective Chun called her one afternoon with an update on the investigation. "We've made some progress on how Davidson found you," he said. "It looks like he was part of an online community that tracked women with military backgrounds, particularly those who had served in combat roles. They shared information, photos, and, in some cases, actually stalked these women. It's a disturbing subculture that we're just beginning to understand. Why would they target female service members?" Sarah asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. Sarah spent the evening reaching out to her former teammates through secure channels they had established years earlier. The messages were brief and coded in the way military personnel often communicated about sensitive topics. But the warning was clear. There was a credible threat to female veterans from special operations, and they should be vigilant about their personal security. The responses came back quickly, ranging from appreciation for the heads-up to dark humor about anyone being foolish enough to target someone with their training. But beneath the bravado, Sarah could sense the same unease she felt. They had all left the battlefield behind only to discover that threats could follow them home. 2 weeks after the parking garage incident, Sarah attended the preliminary hearing for Mark Davidson and the Morrison brothers. She sat in the courtroom wearing professional attire, her bearing confident, but not aggressive. The prosecution had assembled a strong case based on the physical evidence, witness statements, and the materials found in Davidson's apartment. Sarah watched as the defendants were brought in, noting that Davidson avoided making eye contact with her while the Morrison brothers stared at her with expressions mixing fear and resentment. The hearing was procedural, with the judge reviewing the charges and evidence to determine if there was sufficient cause to proceed to trial. The defense attorneys made perfunctory arguments about the strength of the evidence, but it was clear they were going through the motions rather than mounting a serious challenge. The physical evidence was overwhelming, and Sarah's testimony, combined with security guard Jim's account and the video footage from the parking garage's limited camera coverage, painted a clear picture of what had occurred. During a recess, the prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Rachel Kim, approached Sarah. "I wanted to thank you for being here," she said. "I know it can't be easy facing these men again, even in a controlled environment like this." "I've faced worse," Sarah said simply. "I want to make sure they don't get the chance to do this to anyone else." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "They won't." Between the attempted kidnapping charges, the weapons violations, and Davidson's parole violation, he's looking at decades in prison. The Morrison brothers will likely take plea deals, but even those will involve substantial prison time. You stopped these men, Ms. Mitchell. You didn't just save yourself, you saved whoever their next victims would have been. The judge ultimately ruled that there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, setting a date for 6 months in the future. As Sarah left the courthouse, She was approached by a woman she did not recognize. The woman was in her early 50s, well-dressed, with graying hair and eyes that showed both strength and sadness. "Ms. Mitchell? I'm Catherine Price. I hope you don't mind me introducing myself. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did." Catherine paused, gathering her composure. "Mark Davidson attacked my daughter 3 years ago in Nevada. He was supposed to serve 5 years, but got out early on parole. When I heard what happened here, that you stopped him, I felt like I needed to meet you and say thank you." Sarah felt her heart constrict. "I'm so sorry about your daughter. Is she okay?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "She's alive, but she's not okay. The attack left her with physical scars and psychological trauma that she struggles with every day. Knowing that he might have done the same thing to other women, that the system let him out early to hurt more people, it makes me so angry. But you stopped him. You made sure he can't hurt anyone else." They talked for a few minutes, with Catherine sharing details about her daughter's ongoing recovery and her own advocacy work for victims' rights and criminal justice reform. Before leaving, Catherine hugged Sarah and pressed a business card into her hand. "If you ever want to talk, or if there's anything I can do to support your work, please call me. What you're doing at the community center, teaching women to defend themselves, it's exactly what we need more of in this world." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reflecting on the encounter. She thought about Catherine's daughter, about Jennifer from her self-defense class, about all the women whose lives had been altered by violence. She thought about the statistics she had researched, the staggering numbers that represented real human suffering. And she thought about what Marcus had told her years ago during her SEAL training, that the purpose of developing strength and skills was not to glorify violence, but to protect those who could not protect themselves. The following week, Sarah received unexpected news. A local television station wanted to interview her about the parking garage incident and her self-defense work at the community center. She was initially hesitant, not comfortable with public attention, and worried about further compromising her privacy. But Diana convinced her that the publicity could help reach more women who needed the training and could attract resources to expand the program. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center. Sarah spent the days leading up to it thinking carefully about what she wanted to say and how to frame her message. This was not about her heroism or her military background. It was about empowering women, building community resilience, and changing the culture around violence prevention. The reporter, a woman named Michelle Torres who had built a reputation for serious journalism on social issues, arrived with a small camera crew. She spent time observing one of Sarah's classes before sitting down for the formal interview. Michelle was professional and respectful, asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's background, her motivations for teaching self-defense, and her vision for expanding the program. "You've become something of a local hero after stopping that attempted kidnapping," Michelle said during the interview. "But you seem uncomfortable with that characterization." "What?" Sarah thought for a moment before responding. "Hero is a big word that I don't think applies here. I was attacked, and I defended myself using training I received during my military service. The real heroes are the women who show up to these classes week after week, who decide to take control of their own safety despite living in a world that often makes them feel powerless. The real heroes are the survivors who have experienced violence and found the courage to heal and move forward. I'm just trying to provide tools and knowledge that might help prevent others from becoming victims in the first place." You served as a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete that training. That's an extraordinary achievement. How has that experience shaped the work you're doing now? "The military taught me many things," Sarah said carefully. "It taught me discipline, resilience, and the importance of preparation. It taught me that you can be afraid and still take action, that courage isn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. Most importantly, it taught me that we're stronger together than we are alone. That's something I try to build into these classes. This isn't just about individual women learning to fight back. It's about creating a community where we look out for each other, where we share knowledge and support, where we refuse to accept violence as inevitable." The interview continued for nearly an hour, covering topics from practical self-defense techniques to broader questions about gender-based violence and societal change. Michelle was impressed by Sarah's thoughtfulness and her ability to articulate complex ideas in accessible language. As they wrapped up, Michelle mentioned that she wanted to do a follow-up story in 6 months to see how the program had developed. The interview aired the following week and had an immediate impact. The community center's phone started ringing constantly with women wanting to sign up for classes. Sarah received emails from other communities asking if she would consider traveling to teach workshops. Several local businesses reached out offering to sponsor the program or provide resources. A women's foundation contacted Diana about a significant grant that could fund a full-time coordinator position and expand the program to include outreach to underserved communities. The attention was both exciting and overwhelming. Sarah had to quickly adapt to the increased demand, working with Diana to recruit and train additional instructors who could help teach classes. She developed a certification program that would ensure consistent quality and messaging across all instructors while allowing each to bring their own experiences and perspectives to the work. Among the new instructors was Jennifer, the woman who had shared her plan to leave her abusive husband. Jennifer had successfully exited that relationship and was now living in a safe location, rebuilding her life with the support of the domestic violence shelter and therapy. She wanted to give back by helping other women in similar situations, and Sarah recognized that Jennifer's lived experience made her uniquely qualified to understand and address the complexities of intimate partner violence. 3 months after the parking garage incident, Sarah stood before a crowd of over 200 people at a community event celebrating the launch of the expanded self-defense program, which had been officially named the Guardian Initiative. The name had been chosen to reflect the program's mission of empowering women to be guardians of their own safety and protectors of their community. Sarah had prepared remarks for the occasion, but, standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of women who had traveled from across the region to attend, she felt the inadequacy of planned words. Instead, she spoke from the heart about what this work meant to her and why it mattered. When I left military service 6 months ago, I was looking for purpose, she began. I had spent 12 years serving my country in ways I'm proud of, but can't fully discuss. I came to this town hoping to find peace and a normal life. But I've learned something important in these past months. Purpose doesn't come from seeking peace. It comes from engaging with the world as it is and working to make it better. She paused, making eye contact with individuals in the crowd. That night in the parking garage, I was fortunate. I had training and experience that gave me tools most people don't have. But here's what I want you to understand. You don't need to be a Navy SEAL to protect yourself. You don't need years of military training or special operations experience. What you need is knowledge, practice, awareness, and the confidence that comes from preparation. Sarah went on to describe the vision for the Guardian Initiative, how it would provide not just physical self-defense training, but also education on legal rights, psychological resilience, and community building. She talked about partnerships with law enforcement, healthcare providers, and social services to create a comprehensive network of support for women facing threats of violence. This is bigger than any one person or any one program, Sarah said. This is about changing the narrative. Instead of teaching women to live in fear, we're going to teach them to live with strength. Instead of accepting violence as inevitable, we're going to challenge it at every level. And instead of facing these challenges alone, we're going to face them together as a community committed to protecting its most vulnerable members. The speech received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Afterward, Sarah spent hours talking with attendees, answering questions, and listening to stories. Many women shared experiences of violence or fear, of times they had felt helpless or vulnerable. Others talked about taking the classes and how it had changed their confidence and sense of empowerment. Several men attended as well, supporting partners or daughters, or simply wanting to understand how they could be allies in preventing violence. Among the attendees was Marcus Webb, Sarah's former commanding officer, who had driven 6 hours to be present for the launch. He waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching Sarah with a broad smile on his weathered face. "Mitchell, you've done something remarkable here," he said, pulling her into a brief hug. "I knew you'd find your way after leaving the service, but this exceeds anything I imagined. You've taken everything we taught you about protecting people and adapted it for a different battlefield." They walked together through the community center, and Sarah showed Marcus the training space, the equipment that had been donated, and the plans for future expansion. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions based on his decades of experience in training and leadership. "You know what I'm most impressed by?" Marcus said as they sat in Diana's office sharing coffee. "It's not the technical skills you're teaching, though those are clearly excellent. It's the mindset you're developing in these women. You're teaching them to think tactically, to assess situations, to trust their instincts. Those are operator skills, the things that keep people alive in dangerous situations. But you're doing it in a way that's accessible and empowering rather than intimidating." "I learned from the best," Sarah said with a slight smile. "You taught me that the most important weapon we carry is our mind. Everything else is just tools." Marcus nodded approvingly. "There's something else I want to talk to you about. I've been working with a group that provides security consulting and training services. We work with corporations, government agencies, and organizations that need specialized expertise. We're looking to expand into personal security and self-defense training, particularly for high-risk individuals. I'd like you to consider joining us as a consultant and trainer." Sarah was surprised by the offer. "Marcus, I appreciate that, but I'm committed to the work here. I don't want to abandon what we're building." "I'm not asking you to abandon anything," Marcus clarified. "This would be part-time work, maybe 1 or 2 engagements per month. It would provide you with income to support yourself and potentially fund this program. It would also give you access to resources and connections that could benefit the Guardian Initiative. Think of it as expanding your reach and impact." Sarah considered the proposition. The Guardian Initiative was growing rapidly, but it remained dependent on grants and donations that could be unpredictable. Having a reliable income stream would provide stability and allow her to focus more fully on developing the program. The consulting work Marcus described would also keep her skills sharp and expose her to different contexts and challenges. "Can I think about it?" Sarah asked. "Of course. Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready." Marcus paused, his expression becoming more serious. "There's one more thing. The investigation into Davidson and that online network of people targeting female veterans, it's uncovered some disturbing patterns. The FBI is involved now, and they're asking for cooperation from women who've been targeted or have relevant expertise. They specifically mentioned you." Sarah felt a familiar tension settle in her shoulders. "What kind of cooperation?" "They want to brief you on what they've found and get your input on potential threats and security measures. They're also interested in whether you'd be willing to help develop training materials for other female veterans on personal security. It's voluntary, and there's no pressure, but I told them I'd pass along the request." The idea of getting involved in another investigation, another mission, felt both appealing and exhausting. Sarah had worked hard to establish boundaries between her military past and her civilian present. But she also recognized that her unique perspective and experience could help protect other women who had served. It was the same tension she felt about many aspects of her new life, the pull between wanting peace and feeling called to serve. "Set up the meeting," Sarah said finally. "I'll hear what they have to say." Over the following weeks, Sarah's life became a careful balance of multiple responsibilities. She continued teaching classes at the community center, now expanded to 5 sessions per week with additional instructors handling beginner and intermediate levels, while Sarah focused on advanced training. She met with the FBI to discuss the investigation into the network targeting female veterans, providing insights based on her own experience and suggesting security protocols other women could implement. And she began taking occasional consulting assignments through Marcus's company, working with corporations to develop safety programs for employees traveling to high-risk locations. The trial for Mark Davidson approached, and Sarah prepared to testify. The prosecution was confident in their case, but Rachel Kim warned Sarah that the defense would likely try to portray her as the aggressor, suggesting that she had used excessive force against men who posed little real threat. It was a predictable strategy that relied on gender stereotypes about women and violence, and Sarah was ready for it. The trial lasted 3 days. Sarah's testimony was straightforward and compelling. She described the men's approach, their threatening statements, the weapons they possessed, and her reasonable fear for her safety. Under cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to suggest that Sarah had overreacted, that her military training made her perceive threats where none existed. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true that your extensive combat training might make you more likely to respond with violence in situations that could be resolved peacefully? The defense attorney asked, his tone suggesting he thought he had found a weakness in her testimony. No, Sarah replied calmly. My training taught me to assess threats accurately and respond appropriately. These men approached me in an isolated location, made it clear they intended to abduct me, and one of them was armed with a knife. Under those circumstances, using force to defend myself was not only appropriate, it was necessary. After the trial concluded, Sarah stood outside the courthouse with Catherine Price, who had attended every day of proceedings. Catherine's daughter had watched via video link from Nevada, unable to travel but wanting to see justice served for what Davidson had done to her. The two women embraced, united by the experience of confronting evil and emerging on the other side. This doesn't undo what happened to my daughter, Catherine said quietly. Nothing can give her back what she lost. But, knowing he can't hurt anyone else, that he'll spend the rest of his life in prison, it provides a kind of closure we didn't have before. Sarah understood. Justice did not erase trauma, but it could provide validation and safety. It could tell survivors that their suffering mattered, that the system recognized the wrong done to them and would act to prevent it from happening to others. That was something, even if it could never be everything. In the months that followed, the Guardian Initiative continued to expand beyond Sarah's initial vision. The program now operated in 12 locations across 3 counties, with over 30 certified instructors teaching classes to hundreds of women each week. The curriculum had evolved to include specialized training for different populations: teenagers, elderly women, women with disabilities, and women from cultural backgrounds where discussing violence was particularly challenging. Sarah had hired a full-time program director, freeing herself to focus on instructor training, curriculum development, and strategic partnerships. The position had gone to a former police officer named Angela Martinez, Officer Martinez's cousin, who brought both law enforcement experience and a deep commitment to community safety. Together, Sarah and Angela built out a comprehensive organization that addressed violence prevention from multiple angles. One of their most innovative initiatives was a partnership with local schools to provide age-appropriate safety training to students starting in middle school. The program taught young people about healthy relationships, consent, boundary setting, and basic personal safety skills. It was prevention-focused, trying to interrupt cycles of violence before they could take root in a new generation. Sarah also began working more regularly with Marcus's consulting firm, traveling occasionally to provide specialized training to corporate security teams, government personnel, and other high-risk professionals. The work was lucrative enough to provide financial security and fund experimental programs through the Guardian Initiative that might not otherwise attract grant funding. It also kept her operationally sharp, maintaining skills that might atrophy if she focused exclusively on civilian training. The FBI investigation into the network targeting female veterans resulted in multiple arrests across the country. Sarah's cooperation had been valuable, and several agents had expressed appreciation for her insights. But the investigation had also revealed the scope of the problem. Hundreds of women who had served their country were being stalked, harassed, and, in some cases, attacked by men who saw them as threats to masculine identity. The FBI established a task force dedicated to the issue, and Sarah was asked to serve on an advisory board that would help shape protective measures and support services for affected veterans. It was demanding work that required Sarah to confront aspects of her past she had hoped to leave behind. She found herself in regular contact with other female veterans, some of whom had experienced attacks similar to what had happened to her in the parking garage. Their stories were harrowing and heartbreaking, tales of service and sacrifice met with violence and hatred from men who should have been grateful for their protection. But through these difficult conversations, Sarah also discovered a community of remarkably resilient women who refused to be defined by victimhood. They were building lives, raising families, pursuing careers, and finding ways to serve their communities despite the threats they faced. Their strength inspired Sarah and reinforced her commitment to the work she was doing. 1 year after the parking garage incident, the Guardian Initiative held an anniversary celebration at the community center. Over 500 people attended, including students past and present, community partners, donors, and supporters. Mayor Patricia Hamilton gave a speech praising the program's impact and announcing that the city would be providing ongoing funding to support expansion into underserved neighborhoods. Sarah stood at the back of the room during the speeches, preferring to observe rather than be the center of attention. She watched Jennifer, her former student, lead a demonstration of defensive techniques with confidence and skill. She saw Diana beaming with pride at what the community center had become. She noticed Angela coordinating with volunteers to ensure the event ran smoothly. All around her were people who had taken the seed of an idea and grown it into something larger and more impactful than Sarah could have created alone. Marcus approached her during a quiet moment, 2 cups of punch in hand. He offered one to Sarah with a knowing smile. "You don't like being celebrated, do you?" "It makes me uncomfortable," Sarah admitted. "This was never about me. It was about creating something useful, something that could help people." "That's what makes you good at this work," Marcus observed. "You're mission-focused rather than ego-focused. But you should recognize what you've accomplished here, Sarah. You've created an organization that's changing lives and probably preventing crimes we'll never know about because they never happen. That's worth celebrating." Sarah sipped her punch, considering his words. "I keep thinking about that night in the parking garage. If I hadn't had my training, if I hadn't been able to defend myself, what would have happened? Not just to me, but to whoever else Davidson and his partners would have targeted afterward. And I think about all the women who don't have that training, who end up victims because they don't know how to protect themselves." "You can't save everyone," Marcus said gently. "That's something every operator has to learn eventually. You do what you can with the resources and time you have, and you accept that there are limits to what one person can accomplish." "But I'm not one person anymore," Sarah replied. "That's what this has become. A community effort, hundreds of people working together to create safety and empowerment that scales in ways individual action never could." As the evening continued, Sarah found herself in conversation with dozens of people, each sharing how the Guardian Initiative had impacted their lives. A teenager talked about using de-escalation techniques to avoid a fight at school. A woman in her 60s described feeling more confident about her personal safety for the first time in years. A man explained how the program had helped him understand his role in preventing violence by calling out problematic behavior among his male friends. Near the end of the event, a young woman approached Sarah hesitantly. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with nervous energy and eyes that darted around the room. "Ms. Mitchell, my name is Amy. I've been following your story since that night in the parking garage. I'm a Marine, just finished my first deployment, and I've been thinking about what comes next for me. Would you have time to talk sometime about transitioning to civilian life?" Sarah recognized something of herself in this young woman, the uncertainty about identity and purpose that came with leaving military service. "Of course. Why don't you give me your contact information, and we can set up a time to meet for coffee." They exchanged information, and Amy left looking relieved and hopeful. Sarah made a mental note to reach out within the week. She remembered how lost she had felt during her own transition, how valuable it would have been to have someone who understood the unique challenges facing female veterans. If she could provide that support to Amy and others like her, that would be another way of serving. As the crowd began to thin, Sarah helped with cleanup, falling easily into the teamwork and camaraderie that had characterized her military service. Diana worked alongside her, occasionally sharing observations about the evening's success. "You know what I love most about tonight?" Diana said as they stacked chairs. "It's seeing how many men showed up to support this program. When we first started, some people worried that focusing on women's safety would alienate men or create division. But instead, it's bringing people together around shared values of safety and respect." Sarah nodded. "The men who are threatened by women's empowerment were never going to be our allies anyway. But the men who recognize that violence against women harms everyone, who want their daughters and partners and friends to be safe and confident, they've been incredible supporters." After cleanup was complete, Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of the town that had become her home. It was a clear night, with stars visible despite the ambient light from street lamps. She thought about the journey of the past year, how a single violent encounter had catalyzed changes she never could have predicted. The attack had been terrifying and invasive, a violation that could have broken her. Instead, it had become a turning point, a moment that clarified her purpose and set her on a path of service that felt more meaningful than anything she had done before. Her apartment felt peaceful when she entered, a sanctuary she had created through careful choices about furnishings, lighting, and atmosphere. Sarah changed into comfortable clothes and made tea, settling onto her couch with a notebook where she had been sketching ideas for new program initiatives. But, instead of planning, she found herself reflecting on what she had learned over the past year. She had learned that leaving the military did not mean abandoning her identity as a warrior. It just meant finding new battlefields and new ways to fight. She had learned that vulnerability and strength were not opposites, but complementary qualities that could coexist within the same person. She had learned that the skills developed through military service could be adapted to serve civilian communities in powerful and unexpected ways. Most importantly, she had learned that purpose came not from seeking personal peace, but from engaging with the world's problems and working to address them. The quiet life she had imagined when she first moved to this town had proven impossible, not because of external circumstances, but because it was not who she was at her core. She was someone who moved toward challenges rather than away from them, someone who felt called to protect and serve regardless of the form that service took. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Saw the news coverage of your anniversary event. So proud of you, sis. The kids want to visit soon, and meet the famous Aunt Sarah who teaches people to be superheroes. Sarah smiled at the message and typed a response. Not superheroes, just prepared and confident. But, yes, please visit. I'd love to see you all. She set her phone aside and walked to the window, looking out at the town below. Somewhere in this community were women who had attended her classes and gained skills that might save their lives. Somewhere were men who had learned to be better allies and call out problematic behavior. Somewhere were teenagers developing healthy relationship skills that would serve them throughout their lives. The impact was impossible to quantify, but undeniably real. Sarah thought about Mark Davidson and the Morrison brothers, locked in prison cells where they would remain for decades. She thought about Catherine's daughter and the long road to recovery that still lay ahead of her. She thought about Jennifer and Amy and the countless other women whose names she did not know, but whose lives had been touched by violence or fear. They were all connected, part of a larger story about how society grapples with gender-based violence and what it means to create true safety. The work would never be finished, Sarah realized. There would always be predators, always be situations where someone needed protection or empowerment. But there would also always be people willing to stand against violence, to teach and learn and support each other in creating safer communities. That was what the Guardian Initiative represented, not a solution to an impossible problem, but a commitment to continuous effort toward a better reality. In the weeks that followed the anniversary event, Sarah's routine stabilized into a sustainable pattern. She taught 2 advanced classes per week at the community center, conducted monthly instructor training sessions, and took on consulting projects through Marcus's firm approximately twice per month. She also began writing a book about personal safety and self-defense, drawing on her military experience and civilian teaching to create a comprehensive resource that could reach people beyond those who attended her classes. The FBI Task Force on Threats Against Female Veterans continued its work, and Sarah participated in quarterly meetings where progress was reviewed and strategies refined. The arrests made through the investigation had disrupted several dangerous networks, but new threats constantly emerged. It was frustrating work that required patience and persistence, qualities Sarah had developed through years of military service. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from an unexpected source. Admiral Jennifer Morrison, one of the highest-ranking women in the Navy and someone who had been instrumental in opening SEAL training to women, wanted to meet. They arranged to have coffee at a quiet cafe near Sarah's apartment, and Sarah arrived early, curious about what the Admiral wanted to discuss. Admiral Morrison arrived precisely on time, wearing civilian clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. She was a woman in her late 50s who had broken barriers throughout her career and mentored countless younger women through the challenges of serving in male-dominated fields. After exchanging pleasantries and ordering coffee, the Admiral got to the heart of the matter. "I've been following your work since the parking garage incident," Admiral Morrison said directly. "What you've built with the Guardian Initiative is impressive. But I'm here to talk to you about a different opportunity. The Navy is developing a comprehensive program to support female service members during and after their time in uniform. We need someone with your unique combination of operational experience, teaching ability, and understanding of the challenges women face. I'd like you to consider coming back in a consulting capacity to help develop and implement this program." Sarah was surprised and intrigued. What would that entail? You'd work with the Navy's personnel division to create training curricula, develop support networks, and establish protocols for addressing harassment and violence. It would be part-time work that could be done remotely with occasional travel to bases and facilities. You'd be helping ensure that the women currently serving don't face some of the obstacles you encountered, and that they're better prepared for successful transitions to civilian life. It was a compelling offer that would allow Sarah to make a systemic impact within the institution she had served. But it also represented a deeper re-engagement with the military world than she had anticipated. She asked for time to consider the proposal, and the Admiral readily agreed, providing contact information and encouraging Sarah to reach out with any questions. That evening, Sarah called Marcus to discuss the offer. He listened thoughtfully as she described the opportunity and her conflicted feelings about it. "What's holding you back?" he asked when she finished. "I left the military because I needed to," Sarah said. "I needed space to figure out who I was beyond that identity. Taking this position feels like stepping back into a world I deliberately walked away from. Or it could be integrating your military experience with your civilian life in a way that honors both," Marcus suggested. "You're not being asked to go back on active duty or deploy overseas. You're being asked to use your knowledge to help others, which is exactly what you're doing with the Guardian Initiative. The context is different, but the mission is fundamentally the same." Sarah recognized the wisdom in his perspective. She spent several days thinking about the decision, discussing it with Diana, Emily, and Angela. Each offered different insights, but they all emphasized that the choice had to be Sarah's, based on what felt right for her life and goals. In the end, Sarah accepted the position with the Navy, negotiating terms that would allow her to maintain her commitment to the Guardian Initiative while contributing to systemic change within the military. It felt like the right synthesis of her experiences and skills, a way of serving on multiple fronts simultaneously. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a group of female SEAL candidates at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, where she had completed her own training years earlier. She had been invited to speak to the current class about her experiences and the challenges they might face both during and after their service. Looking at their young, determined faces, Sarah saw herself as she had been, idealistic, ambitious, and perhaps not fully aware of how difficult the road ahead would be. "The training you're undergoing is designed to be the hardest thing you've ever experienced," Sarah began. "It will push you beyond limits you didn't know you had. Some of you won't make it through, and that's not a reflection of your worth or capability. It's simply the reality of a program designed to produce the very best operators for the most demanding missions." She paused, making eye contact with individual candidates. "But I'm not here to talk about the training. I'm here to talk about what comes after. Some of you will serve for decades, building extraordinary careers. Others will serve shorter terms and transition to civilian life. Whatever path you take, know that the skills and mindset you develop here will serve you in ways you can't yet imagine." Sarah shared stories from her own service, carefully avoiding classified information while conveying the intensity and importance of the work. She talked about the bonds formed with teammates, the satisfaction of completing difficult missions, and the privilege of serving something larger than oneself. But she also discussed the challenges, the difficulty of maintaining relationships, the psychological toll of combat, the struggles of transitioning back to civilian life. "When I left the service, I felt lost," Sarah admitted. "I had defined myself by this identity for 12 years, and suddenly, that was gone. I didn't know who I was supposed to be or what I was supposed to do. It took time and effort to discover that I could take everything the Navy taught me and apply it in different contexts, that being a warrior didn't require wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. She described the parking garage attack and its aftermath, the founding of the Guardian Initiative, and the work she was doing to support both active duty service members and veterans. The skills you're learning here, situational awareness, tactical thinking, physical capability, mental resilience, these are transferable. They can be used to protect yourself, protect others, and contribute to your communities in countless ways. After her formal remarks, Sarah took questions from the candidates. They asked about specific aspects of training, about deployments she could discuss, about balancing military service with personal life. One candidate asked the question Sarah had been expecting. Do you ever regret leaving? Sarah considered her response carefully. Regret is too simple a word for something as complex as that decision. There are things I miss about military service. The clarity of mission, the camaraderie, the sense of being part of something larger than myself. But I don't regret leaving because the life I'm building now is meaningful and purposeful in different ways. I'm still serving, still protecting people, still making a difference. The context has changed, but the core mission remains the same. As she left the base that day, Sarah felt a sense of completion. She had returned to where her military journey began, but as a different person with broader perspective and deeper wisdom. The young woman who had started BUD/S all those years ago had been driven by anger at injustice and a desire to prove herself capable. The woman leaving Coronado now was driven by a more nuanced understanding of service, one that recognized multiple paths to making the world safer and better. The years that followed brought continued growth and evolution for both Sarah and the Guardian Initiative. The organization expanded to operate in 8 states, training thousands of women annually and collaborating with law enforcement, healthcare providers, and social services to create comprehensive safety networks. Sarah's book on personal safety became a bestseller, reaching readers worldwide and generating speaking invitations from around the country. Her work with the Navy's support program for female service members led to meaningful policy changes and improved resources for women in uniform. Sarah found satisfaction in knowing that future generations of female sailors would face fewer obstacles and have better support systems than she had experienced. It was the kind of systemic change that happened slowly but had lasting impact. Sarah maintained her connection to her former SEAL teammates, many of whom had also transitioned to civilian life and were finding their own paths to continued service. They formed a network of mutual support, sharing resources and opportunities, celebrating each other's successes, and providing encouragement during difficult times. The bonds forged through shared hardship and danger proved resilient even as their lives took divergent paths. On the 2nd anniversary of the parking garage incident, Sarah returned to that location for the first time since that night. The shopping center looked the same, but her feelings about it had transformed. What had been a site of attack and danger now represented the beginning of something positive, the catalyst for changes that had rippled out to touch thousands of lives. She stood in the exact spot where she had fought off her attackers, remembering the fear and adrenaline, the split-second decisions, the training that had saved her life. But now she also thought about everything that had followed. The women who had learned to protect themselves, the predators who had been stopped, the communities that had become safer and more resilient. One moment of violence had sparked a movement of empowerment that continued to grow and evolve. Security guard Jim, who still worked at the shopping center, recognized Sarah and approached her. He had aged in the 2 years since that night, his hair grayer and his steps slower, but his eyes lit up with recognition. Ms. Mitchell, I still think about that night sometimes. Still can't quite believe what I witnessed. How are you doing, Jim? Sarah asked warmly. I'm good. Getting close to retirement, actually. But I wanted to thank you for something. After that night, I started paying more attention to women who were alone in the garage, especially late in the evening. I've walked several of them to their cars over the past couple of years, just to make sure they were safe. You inspired me to be more proactive about protection. It was a small thing, but Sarah recognized its significance. One person choosing to be more vigilant, more protective, more engaged could prevent harm in ways that would never make headlines, but mattered profoundly to those directly affected. That was the real impact of what she was building. Not dramatic rescues or spectacular victories, but countless small choices made by empowered people creating incremental improvements in safety and respect. As Sarah drove away from the shopping center that evening, she reflected on the unpredictable nature of life. 2 years ago, she had been attacked by predators who saw her as easy prey. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation, not understanding that the woman they targeted had skills and determination that would turn their attempted crime into their own destruction. But, beyond the immediate outcome, they had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would help protect countless others from experiencing similar attacks. There was dark irony in the fact that violence had led to violence prevention work, that trauma had catalyzed healing for so many. Sarah did not believe in fate or divine plans, but she did believe in finding meaning and purpose even in difficult circumstances. She had taken something terrible and transformed it into something valuable, not erasing the harm, but creating something good that might not have existed otherwise. In her apartment that evening, Sarah opened her laptop to review the schedule for the coming week. She had 2 classes to teach at the community center, a consulting project with a Fortune 500 company, a meeting with the FBI task force, and a presentation at a regional conference on violence prevention. It was a full schedule that reflected the multiple roles she had embraced: instructor, consultant, advocate, and mentor. But beyond the formal commitments, Sarah thought about the informal work that happened in the margins. The coffee meetings with veterans navigating transitions to civilian life. The phone calls with women who had experienced attacks and needed someone who understood. The emails from students sharing victories large and small in their journeys toward empowerment and safety. These uncounted moments of connection and support were just as important as the structured programs and formal initiatives. Sarah had learned that service took many forms. It could be leading a dangerous raid in hostile territory or teaching a teenager how to break a wrist grab. It could be developing policy at the institutional level or simply walking someone to their car to ensure they got there safely. What mattered was the commitment to protecting and empowering others, to using whatever skills and resources one possessed in service of making the world slightly better than it had been. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah thought about the question that candidate at Coronado had asked about regrets. The honest answer was more complex than what she had shared in that moment. Yes, she missed aspects of military service. Yes, the transition had been difficult and sometimes painful. But the life she had built in civilian society, the work she was doing through the Guardian Initiative and other avenues, felt authentic and meaningful in ways that honored both her past and her present. She was no longer just a Navy SEAL, and she was no longer just a civilian volunteer. She was something that integrated both identities, a veteran using her skills and experience to serve her community, a warrior who had found new battles worth fighting, a protector who had expanded her definition of protection beyond combat situations to include the quieter but equally important work of education, empowerment, and prevention. The journey that had begun in a parking garage 2 years earlier with 3 men who made a fatal error in judgment had led Sarah to a place of purpose and impact she could not have imagined. She had discovered that the end of one chapter did not mean the end of her story, just the beginning of a new one with different challenges and different opportunities to make a difference. And, as Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she felt something she had not felt in years: contentment with who she was and what she was doing, confidence that her path forward was the right one for her, and gratitude for the circumstances, however difficult, that had led her to this place of clarity and purpose. The warrior who had learned to fight in the world's most dangerous places had found a different kind of battle worth fighting, one waged not with weapons but with knowledge, empowerment, and community building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. There would be women to teach, policies to influence, systems to change, and individuals to support. The work would never be finished because the need would never fully disappear. But Sarah was ready for it, armed not just with the skills learned through military training but with the wisdom gained through struggle, transition, and the deliberate choice to use her strength in service of others. She had been attacked because predators saw her as vulnerable. She had survived because she was anything but, and she had transformed that survival into a movement that was helping ensure others would have the tools and confidence to protect themselves. That was the real victory, not the fight in the parking garage, but everything that had come after it. The ripple effects of one woman's refusal to be a victim spreading outward to touch lives in ways both seen and unseen. The men who had tied her hands and tried to hit her had learned the hard way that you never touch a Navy SEAL. But the larger lesson, the one that mattered more, was that you should never underestimate anyone's capacity for strength, resilience, and transformation. Sarah had proven that strength came in many forms, that warriors could be found in unexpected places, and that the most important battles were often fought not with violence, but with courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who needed protection. And so she slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow she would wake and continue the work, one class at a time, one woman at a time, one community at a time, building a world where fewer people would experience what she had survived, and more people would have the tools to protect themselves if they ever needed them. It was not the life she had planned when she left military service, but it was the life she had created, and it was exactly what she was meant to do. But you're trained to kill people, aren't you? Isn't that what Navy SEALs do? Rachel Kim objected immediately to the inflammatory characterization, but Sarah remained composed. I'm trained to neutralize threats. In this case, I used the minimum force necessary to prevent 3 men from abducting me. All 3 survived with relatively minor injuries, which demonstrates that I exercised considerable restraint. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against all 3 defendants. Davidson received a sentence of 35 years to life, while the Morrison brothers each received 20-year sentences. As the verdicts were read, Sarah felt not triumph, but relief. These men would not hurt anyone else for a very long time. From what we can tell, it's a mix of motivations, Chen explained. Some of them see it as a challenge, a way to prove their dominance over women they perceive as threatening traditional gender roles. Others seem to get off on the idea of victimizing someone who should be able to defend themselves. It's sick, and we're working with federal authorities to track down other members of this network. The information was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. Sarah had encountered misogyny throughout her military career, from subtle biases to overt hostility. The idea that such attitudes would extend into criminal behavior was unfortunate, but logical. What concerned her more was the implication that other female veterans might be at risk, targeted specifically because of their service. How many women are we talking about? Sarah asked. We don't know yet. The online forum Davidson was part of had hundreds of members and discussed dozens of potential targets. We're trying to identify and warn as many of them as we can, but it's a challenging process. Many of these women have privacy protections because of their service, which makes it harder to reach them. Sarah thought about her former teammates, women she had served with who were now living civilian lives. Were they at risk too? Should she try to contact them and warn them? The question spiraled in her mind, creating new layers of concern beyond her own situation. All come back instantly, as if the 6 months of civilian life had been nothing more than a thin veneer over her true nature. Sarah finished her tea and stood up, walking to the window of her apartment that looked out over the quiet street below. It was after 1 in the morning now, and the town was dark and silent. She thought about Officer Martinez's comment, about how different things might have been if more women had defensive training. She thought about Jessica, her friend who had never fully recovered from her attack. She thought about all the unknown victims that the 3 men she had fought tonight might have claimed if they had not chosen her as their target. An idea began forming in her mind, something that had been percolating in the background of her thoughts for months, but had never quite crystallized into a concrete plan. What if she could do more than just teach a basic self-defense class twice a week? What if she could create a comprehensive program, something that would truly prepare women to protect themselves in dangerous situations? Not military-level training, that was neither practical nor necessary for civilians, but something substantive and empowering. She spent the next hour researching on her laptop, looking at existing self-defense programs, reading statistics about violence against women, and exploring what resources might be available in the community. The numbers were sobering. 1 in 4 women would experience severe physical violence from an intimate partner at some point in their lives. 1 in 5 women would experience attempted or completed sexual assault. Most attacks on women were committed by people they knew, in places they considered safe. Traditional self-defense classes often focused on stranger attacks, on the scenario of someone jumping out of the bushes. But the reality was more complex and more insidious. Women needed to learn how to recognize warning signs in relationships, how to set and enforce boundaries, how to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. They needed both physical skills and psychological tools, the kind of comprehensive approach that Sarah had received in her military training, but adapted for civilian contexts. By 2 in the morning, Sarah had filled several pages in a notebook with ideas and plans. She would expand her classes, offering different levels from beginner to advanced. She would bring in guest speakers, police officers, therapists, and other experts who could address different aspects of personal safety. She would create partnerships with local organizations, domestic violence shelters, schools, and community groups. She would seek grant funding to make the programs free or low cost so that economic barriers would not prevent women from accessing the training. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for someone who was still figuring out her own civilian life. But it felt right in a way that nothing else had since she left the service. This could be her new mission, her way of continuing to serve and protect, but in a different context and through different means. Instead of hunting terrorists in foreign countries, she would be empowering women in her own community to defend themselves against predators. No, it wasn't, Chin confirmed. What's interesting is that Davidson has been in this area for less than 2 months. He relocated here as part of his parole conditions. We're investigating whether there are other victims, other women who might not have been as fortunate as you were tonight. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Sarah thought about the rope, the duct tape, the organized way they had approached her. These were predators who had refined their methods through practice. How many others had there been? How many women had suffered because these men were allowed to walk free? I want to do whatever I can to help, Sarah said firmly. If there are other victims, they deserve justice. Detective Chun smiled slightly, the first real emotion he had shown during the interview. I appreciate that, Ms. Mitchell. We'll likely need you to testify when this goes to court. Your testimony, combined with the evidence we collected at the scene, should be enough to put these men away for a very long time. Sarah was released from the station around midnight with instructions to call if she remembered anything else or if she experienced any problems. Officer Martinez had arranged to have Sarah's car brought to her apartment, and she offered to drive Sarah home personally. During the drive, Martinez spoke more casually than she had at the scene. Can I ask you something? She said as they navigated the quiet streets. What's it like, being one of the only women to make it through Navy SEAL training? Sarah glanced at her, surprised. The officer had clearly done more research than just reading a basic background report. Very few people outside the military community knew about the recent integration of women into SEAL teams, and even fewer knew about the individuals who had successfully completed the training.